Hey everyone, don't be alarmed. I've got a knife, but it's for a good reason. Because in this video, I'm going to show you how I built this magnetic knife block. So a few weeks ago, a friend of mine gave me a whole bunch of rough cut pine, and I wanted to say thank you, so I thought I'd make him a little something out of some of that wood. And this is the idea that I came up with. You can see I'm planing down one of those boards that he gave me here, and this is the one that I'm going to use to make this knife block. So a lot of this wood is split and cracked and not in real great condition, but I did find this little area here that I really like the pattern of the grain in it. And I think that if I center this piece that I'm building here, right kind of with this aiming for right in the center, I think that's going to make for a real nice look. So I'm going to cut off this part and cut off here, and then I'll wind up cutting this fairly narrow as well. We're going to cut out that knot. So I'm just trying to grab this band of rings here. I really like that pattern. It's really pretty. So after I cut it to rough size, I measured about how wide I wanted it to be and finished cutting it out on the table saw. Now that I had the basic size and shape cut out, I grabbed a couple of my kitchen knives just to check to see if the proportions were right, and I liked what I saw. So let's talk for just a minute about the magnets that I'm using. These are Neodymium, I don't know how to say it. They are rare earth magnets that I picked up on Amazon for about 20 bucks. You can see they're in this form factor that's kind of a long, skinny rectangle, and I got a whole brick of them. The brick is assembled with these little black spacers that you'll see I'll use later as figuring out some of my spacing later on in the project. But these are really, really brittle. You can see this little corner here has actually already broken off before I even received them. And that's maybe a little foreshadowing. You've got to be really careful when you're handling these. If they slam together, they will have a tendency to shatter. They can also pinch you if you're not really careful handling them, so do exercise some caution using these magnets. They're very strong. Alright, so I don't really have any plans for this project. I'm kind of making it up as I go, and as a result I needed to figure out through trial and error what was going to be the right arrangement and distance to get the magnets as far as the spacing away from the metal of the blade. I started with this little piece of foam that the magnet shipped in. It's about 3 millimeters thick, and one magnet wasn't quite strong enough to hold the blade up, but I found that if I used 2 magnets that worked really well. And I messed with several different arrangements. I tried stacking the magnets on top of each other or doing 2 magnets side by side, and ultimately I settled on doing an arrangement where I would have 2 rows of magnets that were running parallel to each other, side by side, through the center of the knife block. And that's what I thought was going to be the best. Ultimately, you'll see later when I start putting things together that I changed my mind and wound up going with 2 rows that were stacked on top of each other instead of parallel to each other. But this is how I figured out the arrangement to start with. So what I'm planning to do is use my router, and I will route out a channel in this wood that runs from, probably about 1.5 inches to 2 inches in from each end. I'll just measure out how long the magnets are, lay them all out, and that'll determine how long my channel needs to be, and I'll route it wide enough that I can put 2 side by side the entire length. And I'll route deep enough that I will wind up with 1/8 or less, 3 millimeters or 2 millimeters of face wood. So then there was just one more thing to do before I did any more work on the wood itself, and that was to lay out the magnets that I had chosen to use in the back to make sure that they were going to fit and that I had enough of them, etc. So here I am laying them out and making sure that they're going to fit with the mounting hardware, and then it was time to sand. So I decided to go ahead and sand this now, almost to the point that it was ready to receive finish, because once I've cut the channel in the back, that front is going to be so thin that I didn't want to risk sanding down through it and ruining the project. Then I measured and marked where the mounting hardware needed to go so that I could route out for it as well. And now that that's been cut, just checking the fit, it looks great, so we can move on. So as I mentioned earlier, I don't have any plans for this project. I'm just kind of making it up as I go. And one of the downsides of that is that you have to figure out how to do certain things along the way. And one of the things that I had a hard time figuring out the right way to do was cutting this channel in the back. Now, the easiest way to do this, the right way to do this, would be to use a router table. Now, I happen to have a router table, but it's got a different router in it, and changing out the routers is really difficult, and I would have to because the router that's in the table doesn't use the same bits, and it was just going to be a pain in the neck. So I tried to put together a little jig here using a bunch of clamps and my level as a straight edge, and it was just not going to work. My first cut actually wound up really crooked. So I switched instead to trying to use this double sticky tape that came with the magnets as a way to attach the workpiece to my workbench and fix it there so that it wouldn't move and hold it strongly enough that I could do the routing. Now, I was skeptical that this was going to work, but it actually turned out to work really, really well. This double sticky tape is super strong stuff. So once I got that tape down to the workbench, then I just arranged my level as a fence to run the router along, and was just really careful to make sure that it was set up exactly parallel to the workpiece using the little gauge block you saw me use there. And then I just kept taking repetitive passes with the router, lowering it a little bit each time. And after each pass, I would check the depth to make sure that I hadn't gotten down to my target yet, and I would lower the bit a little bit more, and it just kept repeating that process until I got down to the depth that I was looking for. Once I had it deep enough, then I was able to move my level in just a little bit closer towards the corner of the table, which then by taking one more pass wound up making the channel wide enough to fit the magnets in side by side. Now, if I was trying to do this project again, I would know going into this that I'm not going to try and do the magnets side by side. I was going to stack them. And that means I wouldn't have to make such a wide channel, and I could do it all without having to move any of my fence or anything. But really, if I did it again, I would just use the router table. Let me take these magnets back out. Oh. Careful, careful. See, I wasn't super careful and they've shattered. Shattered several of them. I won't be able to use any of those. Dang it. You gotta be careful with these magnets. They are very finicky and very brittle. Oh my goodness. Shoot. So once I was happy with the channel that I cut, it was time to put some epoxy into it to hold the magnets in. And epoxy's kind of messy stuff, so I decided to just mix it down in the channel, which really worked out pretty well actually. Just squirted equal parts down into the channel and then mixed it right in place, dropped the magnets in, and then I placed them on top of my toolbox, which would hold those magnets down really firmly towards the face of the wood. And that worked really well. Then I also mixed up a little bit more epoxy to pour in over the top to cover the back side of the magnets. And once the epoxy had cured, I sanded it one more time very lightly through several different grits to get it ready to receive the finish. Now, speaking of the finish that I'm going to be using, one of the things that I like to do is to reuse a little bit of this Tyvek house wrap that I had left over from when I built my shed. This stuff works really well as little temporary drop cloths, and I use it to protect the top of my work surfaces. One last thing to do before I apply the finish, and that's to screw in the hardware for mounting. Got that all taken care of, and now it's time to apply this butcher block finish. This is a food grade finish that is extremely strong and durable, but it's also non-toxic. The only thing to point out about this is you cannot apply it over any other stain or finish. But this is great stuff, I really like it. And I will point out that I'm not being paid to endorse any particular product or say nice things about any particular company. This is the kind of finish that I like to use for these projects. Any food grade finish that you like is going to be perfectly fine. After 4 coats of that finish, it was finally time to install the knife block. So I took it over to my friend's house and then very carefully measured exactly how long it wound up being, and transferred the measurements I would need for the mounting brackets right to his wall using a level to make sure everything was going to line up nice with the bottom of his cabinets. We checked for studs in the areas where we were going to be drilling holes and did not find any, so we decided to use some drywall anchors, and these are the style that I chose for this project. They don't hold a ton of weight, but this block and the knives are not very heavy, so it's perfect. This is the style that you pound in this section with a hammer, and then you twist in the rest of it with a screwdriver to get the anchor all the way into the drywall. As you can see, installing these is really pretty simple. One quick word of caution: after you've pounded in the first part of this type of anchor, don't grab your screw gun or a power drill or any power tool to go ahead and screw it into the wall. Just do it by hand. It's just a few twists, and that way you can make sure that it gets seated perfectly flush with the surface of the wall without tearing anything up. Then it was time to install the screws that the block would actually be mounted on, leaving a little bit of it sticking out from the wall so that they would fit on the mounting hardware of the block, which then just pops right onto those screws. And we're done. We'll check for level one more time to make sure everything's lined up right. And we're finished. There's nothing left to do now except to try it out with several sets of knives to see how well it works. All right, well that's it. This project is a really pretty simple one to do. It just requires a piece of wood, some magnets, and a few tools to use to cut out that channel in the back. As you can see, the knife block is really simple to use. All you do is put the knife anywhere close to it, and those magnets are strong enough that they just suck them right into the block. And that food grade finish that I used is safe for any food application, so there's no worry about that finish coming off and getting into something edible. It's perfectly safe. And it's a very durable finish. It should last for a very long time. Well, thank you very much for checking out this video. I appreciate you watching this far. If you've learned a little something or you've enjoyed what you've seen, why don't you give me a thumbs up down there below. And other than that, there's nothing else to say except thank you very much for watching.